Roskilde, located just outside of Copenhagen, is now a quiet city known for its festivals, museums, and commuters. It is part of the urban sprawl and home to approximately 50,000 people. In ancient times, it was considered a metropolis, but today it pales in comparison to its economically dominant neighbor, Copenhagen. The city's initial success was attributed to its natural harbor, although it is no longer viable for modern ocean-going vessels due to its shallow depth. However, during the early Middle Ages, when ships were not as large, the shallow fjords of Roskilde were advantageous, providing protection from the elements and enemies. It is interesting to note that Copenhagen did not exist during that time. Instead, Roskilde served as the capital and most significant city for the emerging Danish monarchy. Nestled between boggy lowlands and wooded hills, Roskilde boasts a rich history that dates back even before the Viking era, extending into the pre-Christian age. Let us travel back in time approximately 1,000 years to the mid-11th century, a period when the Scandinavia we know today was just beginning to take shape. At that time, Roskilde had a population of around 5,000 people, which may not seem substantial. However, during the Viking Age, it was one of the largest and most important settlements among the kingdoms of the North Sea. Although predominantly a rural society with scattered farming communities across the Danish islands and the Jutland Peninsula, Roskilde stood out as one of the few towns in existence during that era. It developed as a trading center and owed its growth, in part, to intentional efforts by the Danish rulers, who learned the art of statehood from their German neighbors to the south and their Anglo-Saxon cousins across the sea. According to the near-contemporary German chronicler Adam of Bremen and the slightly later Danish writer Saxo Grammaticus, Roskilde was founded in the 980s by the Danish king Harald Bluetooth, the son of Gorm the Old, one of Denmark's earliest verified kings. Harald Bluetooth continued his father's work in unifying the kingdom, constructing massive fortresses throughout the land and reinforcing the Danevirke fortifications along Denmark's southern border. However, despite these efforts, the primary threat to his authority persisted from the German kingdom to the south. This threat eventually compelled Harald and his family to abandon their power base at Jelling on the Jutland Peninsula entirely. Roskilde was chosen as their new refuge, strategically distant from land attacks by Germany. Here, the Danish kings could grow their power undisturbed, while maintaining a constant watch over the Baltic and Norwegian coasts. Although initially lacking fortifications, Roskilde's location at the base of the Roskilde Field, with its naturally protected harbour, offered a favourable advantage. In the 980s, Harald Bluetooth, now a Christian, erected a wooden church dedicated to the Holy Trinity, along with a nearby royal residence. The city's name, associated with a legendary king named Rar, possibly from the 6th century, added a sense of historical significance to the area. After Harald Bluetooth's overthrow by his son Sweyn Forkbeard in the 980s, the tradition of burying the deceased Danish kings in the church he had built began. This tradition would continue for centuries. Around the year 1000, Sweyn Forkbeard concentrated the power of the Danish crown in Roskilde, transforming the city into a new political and ecclesiastical capital. This position of prominence endured well into the 15th century, as Danish power fluctuated. Over time, Roskilde had to fortify itself not against the Germans on the mainland but against Viking attacks from the sea. To signal the approach of hostile fleets, a system of beacons was implemented. Fires were strategically lit on high ground, extending from the fjord's mouth at Kattegat in the north down to Roskilde. Denmark had amassed numerous enemies since the reign of Sweyn Forkbeard, a ruler who launched relentless attacks in all directions. His son, Canute the Great, continued this pattern of aggression for nearly a century. The surrounding seas became a battleground for Viking kings, and the conflicts persisted. Canute witnessed the crumbling of some of his conquests before his death. His eldest son and appointed successor in Norway, Sweyn, was overthrown in 1035 and died in exile in Roskilde. A few months later, Sweyn was followed to the grave by Canute, leading to a succession crisis throughout the North Sea kingdoms. These wars continued for about 50 years until 1050, when the line of Gorm the Old came to an end, and the Yngling dynasty was replaced by a variety of Viking kings and warlords vying for power and territory. Denmark was in a state of flux. One of these kings, Harald Hardrada, who had recently returned from a lengthy exile serving in the Varangian Guard in Constantinople, arrived in Norway with riches, confidence, and an elite force of battle-hardened warriors. He possessed an impressive fleet of longships and posed a significant threat to Denmark. In 1050, a significant event took place in Roskilde involving the heir to the Danish throne, who was set to be burned. This individual, Fainus Steritzen, was the son of one of Canute's trusted followers and was considered the most suitable candidate for the position. However, he was unaware of the impending danger that awaited him. While not directly related to the ruling monarchs, he was at least a Danish man, which could not be said for his Norwegian predecessor, Magnus the Good, who had pressing claims on Denmark. King Harald of Norway arrived with his fleet at the trading emporium of Hedeby in Jutland, near the Danish border, signaling the beginning of a conflict. Hardrada, known for his tactics of burning ships, had learned this method during his service to the Byzantine emperors. He employed this strategy by setting his own ships on fire and sending them towards the town. The remains of these charred vessels were discovered during recent excavations, providing evidence of his destructive actions. After Hedeby, the Norwegian fleet plundered and set fire to the town of Roskilde, escaping the pursuing Danish forces. Over the next 14 years, Hardrada continued his campaign of raiding the Danish coasts, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. Meanwhile, in Jutland, the Danes established an elaborate defensive system along the Roskilde fjord to protect their capital. The Roskilde Ship Museum now houses ships excavated since the 1950s, which offer insights into the maritime defense of early medieval Denmark during the Viking Age. These ships, known as Skulderlev ships, were versatile and served various purposes such as trade, defense, fishing, and warfare. In their afterlife, they were deliberately scuttled in the sailing channel, filled with stones, and formed an underwater wall to impede enemy forces. The sunken ships, along with rock-filled boxes, created a formidable defense system, capable of closing off the fjord if necessary. Additional defenses such as stakes and guard platforms were also discovered, aiming to protect the town from sea-based attacks. Although Denmark and Norway remained in conflict for several decades, there is no evidence that Hardrada targeted Roskilde specifically. He knew that his forces would face a barrage of Danish weapons if they attempted to invade. Moreover, his attention was focused on achieving a greater prize. After his victory over Sweyn II of Denmark and a subsequent peace treaty, Hardrada turned his sights to England. In 1066, he embarked on a campaign to conquer England, but he ultimately met his demise at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Meanwhile, Hedeby was permanently destroyed after an attack by Slavic warriors. Despite the challenges faced, Roskilde managed to survive and endure. However, new generations of defenses were constructed over the old ones. In 1066, the city of York witnessed the greatest English victory against an invading Viking army, but shortly after, Harold Godwinson was killed by an army from Normandy. The defeat at Stamford Bridge led to a shift in power dynamics, and Denmark briefly contemplated an invasion. Eventually, peace prevailed, and a period of relative tranquility ensued, marked by further strengthening of the sea wall at Roskilde. By 1075, the defences were reinforced with the sinking of two additional ships, Skuld Arlef II and Skuld Arlef VI. These measures were taken due to concerns of a potential attack, possibly from the new Norman rulers in England. During this period, Pope Gregory VII sent a letter addressing the geopolitical situation in Scandinavia, offering a glimpse into the mindset of 11th century kings and the uncertain circumstances faced by the Scandinavians. In 1076, Spain Estrigan, who had ruled for nearly 30 years, passed away. His reign outlasted most of his rivals, and he left behind a legacy of warrior sons who would vie for his kingdom. One of his sons, Harold Hahn, emerged as the initial successor, employing astute strategies to secure the support of regional lords. However, his younger brother, Canute, opposed his claim and was a formidable warrior in his own right. The Viking Age persisted through these conflict-prone individuals, who engaged in warfare using dragon-headed longships. During Spain's military campaign in England in 1069, an individual named Canute played a significant role. He continued to participate in subsequent campaigns, notably in 1075, where he assumed a more prominent position. This elevated role hinted at Canute's superior reputation as a war leader compared to his brother Harold. Canute's reputation was further reinforced by his victories in Scandinavia, as documented by the esteemed historian Kalman Arson. On his return journey to Denmark in 1075, Canute made a stop in Flanders, a Frankish county staunchly opposed to Norman interests. It was during this time in Flanders that Canute managed to secure support for a future campaign against England. His plan was relatively straightforward: seize the Danish throne the following year. However, everything unraveled for Canute when his brother ascended the throne. Rather than accepting defeat quietly, Canute headed north, initially seeking refuge in Sweden. He then proceeded to the Norwegian court, where many historians believe he rallied support for a campaign against Denmark. Canute found a firm ally in Olaf, the son of Harald Hardrada, the ruler of Norway. Olaf, a capable soldier, had also witnessed the death of his father during the famous Stamford Bridge campaign in 1066. Despite the mounting tensions, an assault on Roskilde, a city in Denmark, never materialized, or at least there is no existing evidence of such an attack. In April 1080, Harold, Canute's brother, passed away, leaving the throne open for Canute to inherit effortlessly. Without lifting a finger, Canute succeeded his brother as the ruler. Canute had long harbored plans of marriage to a daughter of Count Roberts, the first of Flanders, and they promptly united their efforts to invade England. In 1085, with the support of his brother-in-law Robert of Flanders and his ally Olaf of Norway, Canute mustered one of Denmark's largest armies in generations for the invasion. However, Denmark's arch-nemesis, the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV, had his own designs and motivations. Rudolf of Rheinfelden, an estranged nobleman who had sought refuge at Canute's court, provided Henry with an opportunity to delay Canute's invasion of England. Canute, hesitant to disband his peasant levies and jeopardize the winter's food supply, faced crippling indecision. In early 1086, a full-scale revolt erupted, forcing the king to flee first to Schleswig and eventually to Odense. According to the chronicler Helmuth of Canterbury, in July 1086, Canute found himself trapped inside a church alongside his brother Benedict and 17 loyal followers. Tragically, they were all cut down before the altar. 2 decades later, Canute was canonized by the Pope, and his image graced the walls of numerous holy sites across Christendom. Meanwhile, Robert, the Count of Flanders, redirected the resources he had intended for the invasion of England. He embarked on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and, in a precursor to future events, provided crucial military support to the Byzantine Emperor Alexius Comnenus in their struggle against the Seljuk Turks, a nomadic people originating from Central Asia. By 1085, Canute IV became the last Scandinavian monarch to seriously contemplate an invasion of England. The Viking Age was predominantly over, and Scandinavian power brokers now sought allegiances and marriage proposals from the papacy in Rome and continental European rulers. However, Astrid's sons, Olaf Hunga and Erik Evergot, continued to rule and had their fair share of Viking raids in their youth. Both kings forged strong alliances with Norway and spent time at the Norwegian court. It was with Norman England, across the North Sea, that a new Cold War would unfold. Nonetheless, an entirely new frontier was about to emerge. Scandinavian monarchs, having achieved equal status with their continental European counterparts, would soon follow in their footsteps to the east, engaging in conquest and embarking on pilgrimages. The Scandinavian world was on the verge of expanding onto an even grander stage. In 1103, after a drunken brawl resulting in the deaths of 4 of his men, King Erik Evergot took it upon himself to embark on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. The Holy Land had recently been conquered by the armies of the First Crusade, which included Robert the Frisian, the son of the Count of Flanders. Erik traveled down the river systems of Eastern Europe in a magnificent procession and eventually arrived at the court of the Byzantine Emperor Alexius Comnenus. Despite falling ill, Erik insisted on continuing his journey. However, he passed away upon arriving on Cyprus and was buried at Paphos. His wife, Queen Odile, pressed on and successfully reached Jerusalem before her own demise. She was laid to rest on the Mount of Olives. The Viking Age was drawing to a close, making way for the era of crusading.